Welcome back to Awareness. We're downtown Columbia outside of the law office of Johnson, Toll, and Batiste, talking to one of the state's Black history makers, a living legend, Mr. I.S. Leevy Johnson, who's done so much, not only as an attorney, but a lawmaker as well. Check it out. Attorney I.S. Leevy Johnson, thank you so much for joining us on Awareness today. We are highlighting Black history makers in the Midlands, across the Midlands, and we are so happy to have you sitting here with us today.
My pleasure.
Do you ever sit down and realize the impact that you've made on Black history here in Columbia, across the state?
I do not. When I make speeches to young people, I always tell them that I do not consider myself a success, because I think success is a goal in life, and I'm still striving to be successful. I've had some very good experiences, but I'm still trying to be successful.
Yeah, I understand that, but we have to give credit where credit is due. And I have to educate our viewers who may not be familiar with your background. You started making history at a very young age. You were the first Black person to graduate and complete the entire law curriculum at the University of South Carolina. Right. Tell us what year that was, and take us back to that time about how difficult that may have been for you.
It was in 1968 when I graduated, and I'm very honored that they have unveiled a portrait in my honor at the University of South Carolina Law School. The challenge was when I enrolled at the University of South Carolina Law School, my first year in 1965, the first African American who had enrolled did not make it after his first year. So I was really scared, and but I was able to matriculate for 3 years and successfully graduated in 1968, and that got me started in the legal profession.
Take us back to 1968. What was society like at that time, and why, so people can understand the context of why it was a big deal that you were able to complete that program at USC?
Well, back in those days, just like now, we do not have integration, we have assimilation. And there was still resistance to African Americans in all professional schools, and also in the practice of law. I was very fortunate when I graduated. I was tutored by the late Judge Matthew Perry, Lincoln Jenkins, and Harold Boulware. And there was a camaraderie among us to help me and to enable me to learn how to practice. You learn the theory in law school, but you have to practice in order to learn how to perfect yourself in the profession.
Upon graduation, how was that for you, and what did you have to overcome to do that?
Well, an interesting nuance about my life is when I went to law school, I did not intend to practice law. My chosen profession was to be a funeral director and embalmer. My grandfather started our funeral business in 1932, so after I graduated from law school, I went back to the funeral business to work for my grandfather, and after a couple of years, then I went out into private practice. It was very challenging back in those days because there was still a lot of racial injustice in South Carolina. There was a lot of discrimination. There was a lot of favoritism to white lawyers. There were no Black judges in South Carolina. And one of the aims of Black attorneys was to enhance the image of Black people and Black lawyers, so they could attract business and do an effective job.
Wow, that's really deep, and thank you so much for providing that context. Now, in addition to being a lawyer, you also made history by becoming one of the first Black people elected to the General Assembly here in the state since Reconstruction. Explain to us what happened during that time, what motivated you to be a lawmaker, and you know, when you say since Reconstruction, we're talking about the 1800s.
What happened was, really, when I got elected with Jim Feld out of Richland County and Herbert Fielding out of Charleston County, we were sort of the roof on the building because there were foundations being built years before we got elected. And I did not offer for the job. A group of people in South Carolina, some African American leaders, recruited me and recruited Jim Felder. And the one thing that they kept advocating was, historically, whites who objected to us, to African Americans being elected to offices, would argue that we want some qualified blacks, we want qualified people. Well, the qualifications of Jim Feld and Herbert Fielding and I were equal to or superior to our white counterparts.
Wow.
So they couldn't use that argument when they went to the polls. And fortunately, in 1970, we were successful.
All right, well, that's a great place to pause. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll have much more awareness and continue our conversation with Attorney Leevy Johnson after this.